Imagine stepping into a rescue mission where, instinct just simply doesn't matter.
Right, there are no gut decisions.
Exactly. No heroic improvisations. You're stepping into a tactical landscape that's guided entirely by a math equation. And your survival depends purely on a predictive model keeping you alive.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And that is the chilling reality of the Behavioral Probability Unit, or the BPU.
Yeah, the BPU. It's an organization built on this single, unwavering philosophy. The idea that if you have enough data and, if your predictive models are sophisticated enough, you can perfectly control chaotic events.
You can just eliminate human error entirely.
Exactly. That's the dream anyway.
But today, we're going to look at the exact moment that philosophy shatters.
Welcome, listeners, to the most devastating deep dive we have ever covered.
Yeah, this one is heavy.
It really is. We are diving into a stack of highly classified case files. We've got secure comms, transcripts, incident reports, and tactical audio logs from the Season 2 finale of the Behavioral Probability Unit. The source material here is just incredible.
Right, and our mission for this deep dive is to analyze the anatomy of a tragic rescue. We're looking at how absolute faith in a mathematical model can lead to catastrophic, real-world failure.
And the stakes detailed in these incident reports are, well, they're incredibly high.
Oh, yeah.
The environment they are operating in just completely defies standard physics.
Yeah.
The BPU team is executing a high-risk extraction inside a weaponized time field. They call it a temporal stall.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the tactical parameters in Agent Hatch's audio log are, they're incredibly specific, but the concept of a temporal stall is just mind-bending.
Oh, it's wild.
So the location is Secret Canyon in Sedona, Arizona. And they're looking at this machine, and there are 3 hikers trapped inside its radius. How exactly does a machine stall time?
Well, based on the technical specs in the files, the machine utilizes these massive, super dense centrifuges.
Okay.
And by spinning this exotic matter at incomprehensible speeds, it actually warps local space-time.
Yeah.
Right. It creates a pocket of extreme gravitational time dilation. So inside that boundary line, time slows to an absolute crawl compared to the outside world.
So those 3 hikers who wandered into the radius,
Yeah.
from the outside, they just look frozen.
Completely frozen, like statues.
And a team can't just walk in and pull them out, right?
Yeah.
Because they would get frozen in the distortion, too.
Exactly. They have to wait for a highly specific window. The logs show they were waiting for a targeted mechanical failure.
Right. The log time is exactly 11:05 Vine 49:50 a.m. What happens at that exact timestamp?
That is the moment the machine's thermal limit is reached.
Okay, so it gets too hot.
Yeah, centrifuges spinning that fast generate an astronomical amount of heat. So eventually, just to prevent the machine from melting itself down into slag, it has to temporarily power down to vent that heat.
And the moment it powers down, the space-time distortion collapses.
Bingo.
And according to the logs, at 11:59:50 a.m., the massive centrifuges stop humming, the air pressure normalizes, and instantly, the 3 frozen hikers collapse into the dirt.
They're suddenly back in real-time gravity.
Right. And that impact with the dirt is the starting gun.
Yeah. The clock is ticking. The team has a strictly calculated 42-second window of thermal venting.
42 seconds.
Just 42 seconds before the machine cools down enough for the centrifuges to automatically spin back up and, snap the time field back into place.
And the adrenaline of this breach is just palpable in the audio. Agent Hatch and the brilliant founder of the BPU himself, Elias Vance, they rush into the radius.
And they're moving fast.
Oh yeah, with absolute clinical precision. At 15 seconds, Hatch drags the first hiker past the boundary line to safety.
So the timeline is perfectly on track. They are executing the math exactly as planned.
Right. Then at 22 seconds, Elias Vance drags the second hiker out.
Okay, good.
But instead of grabbing the third and final hiker and getting out of there, Elias pivots.
Yeah, this part is wild.
He grabs a shaped explosive charge from his gear, turns around, and sprints back toward the center of the field to plant it. I mean, I have to push back on the logic of this plan.
I know, it sounds crazy.
Why risk planting a bomb during a delicate split-second rescue operation? It's like trying to defuse a landmine while simultaneously performing CPR.
That's a great way to put it.
You're mixing opposite operational goals and playing demolition derby with a ticking clock.
Yeah.
Why not just grab the person and run?
Well, It sounds counterintuitive, but the tactical reports clarify why this was deemed absolutely necessary. This wasn't just a search and rescue, it was a neutralization mission.
Because the time field was weaponized.
Exactly. If they just pulled the hikers out and walked away, the machine would simply re-engage. It would remain an active, highly dangerous anomaly in the middle of a national park.
Right.
It had to be destroyed from the inside out while its shields, the time distortion itself, were down.
So the only way to kill it is when it's vulnerable during this venting cycle.
Precisely. And the reason Elias Vance didn't hesitate to run back in with an explosive was his utter confidence in that 42-second window.
Because he wrote the math.
Yeah, he was the architect of that model. He calculated the cooling curve of those battery banks himself. He truly believed his math was flawless.
But as Elias is planting that charge, back in the BPU Secure Command Unit, things are unraveling. Fast.
Yeah, the transition in the comms logs is terrifying.
It really is. It goes from tactical execution to sheer panic. We hear an operative named Jax watching the live telemetry, and you can just feel the blood drain from the room.
Jax is looking at the live data feeds coming off the machine, and he realizes the thermal telemetry is spiking in a way they didn't predict at all.
It's cooling down too fast.
Way too fast. The machine's battery banks are dumping their heat much faster than Elias's model calculated.
And this is where the philosophy of the BPU becomes its own worst enemy. Because another operative, Cross, immediately argues back over the comms. He yells, "How is that possible? The degradation curve is absolute."
Which is just crazy to say in that moment.
Right. He's literally arguing with live data because a piece of paper told him something else.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly this illustrates the cognitive bias known as the map-territory relation.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, Cross is mistaking the map, the predictive model, for the actual territory, which is the real world.
Yeah.
A theoretical model is a sterile, isolated thing. It assumes a baseline.
Right.
But the real world has infinite variables. Jax is looking at reality while Cross is clinging to the math.
And here's where it gets really interesting and terrifying. Jax figures out the miscalculation in real time. He starts screaming over the comms. Elias Vance, the genius who built this entire operation, failed to account for one massive environmental variable.
The ambient heat of the desert.
It is 105 degrees on the floor of Secret Canyon.
Yeah. If we look at the pure physics of that error, it explains exactly why the timeline collapsed.
Okay.
Elias built his cooling curve focusing entirely on the complex variables like the RPM of the centrifuges, the thermal mass of the battery banks.
The complicated stuff.
Exactly. But he built that curve assuming a standard neutral baseline temperature. He was so focused on the extraordinary that he completely forgot the mundane.
So how does that actually change the venting time mechanically?
Yeah.
Like, why does the heat matter so much?
Think of it like trying to cool off by sweating.
Okay.
If you are in a dry, room temperature environment, sweating works perfectly to dump your body heat. But if you step into a 105-degree sauna, sweating doesn't cool you down the same way.
Oh, because the ambient environment is already saturated with heat.
Exactly. The thermal resistance shifts. The machine was trying to dump its intense heat into an environment that was already baking in the desert sun.
Wow. So the machine registers that it has reached its target reset temperature much faster than anticipated.
Yes. The baseline heat was so high that the system's internal sensors effectively thought it had completed its cooling cycle early.
That's incredible.
The math itself wasn't wrong. The data fed into the math was incomplete.
Which means the safety window wasn't 42 seconds.
Not even close. The actual window before the centrifuges spun back up was only 34 seconds.
Just 34 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the ultimate trap of being the smartest person in the room. You build this flawless, elegant model in a sterile lab, and you forget that the real world is messy, it's chaotic, and it is blisteringly hot.
Yeah.
He saw the machine, but he completely forgot to feel the sun on his own skin.
It's a phenomenon we call model drift.
Model drift.
Yeah, when the conditions in which a model was created diverge from the conditions in which it's applied, the model doesn't just become slightly inaccurate, it becomes actively dangerous. It gives you a false sense of absolute certainty.
And that false certainty brings us to exactly 12:00.24 p.m. This is the event horizon of the tragedy.
Yeah, this chart is really hard to read.
Elias is standing at the central centrifuge. He finally has the third hiker by the collar. He has the explosive charge armed in his hand. And he hears Jax's warning over the comms. You don't have 42 seconds. It's going to re-engage at 34 seconds. Elias, get out.
This raises an important question. What do you do when the very laws of physics you relied on suddenly become your executioner?
Right.
Let's break down Elias's physical reality in that exact millisecond. He looks up at the safety boundary line. It is 25 feet away.
And he's carrying an unconscious hiker who weighs 180 pounds.
And he's standing on loose, shifting desert sand. And he has exactly 4 seconds left.
I mean, for you listening right now, you shouldn't picture a Hollywood action sequence here. There's no dramatic dive to safety.
No, absolutely not. The brutal biomechanics of this moment are undeniable. A human being running on loose sand with zero kinetic momentum simply cannot cover 25 feet while dragging 180 pounds of dead weight in 4 seconds.
It's physically impossible.
It completely defies human physiology. The math he trusted to save them has transformed into a mathematically certain death sentence.
The audio log from Agent Hatch is just heartbreaking to read. Hatch is standing right at the boundary line, completely safe, and he's screaming for Elias to drop the charge, drop the hiker, and just run.
Because it is the only rational calculation left. If Elias drops that massive weight, he regains his mobility. He can absolutely sprint 25 feet in 4 seconds and survive.
But Elias doesn't drop the hiker.
Mm-hmm.
Reading this next part of the incident report, it leaves you hollow. The founder of the Behavioral Probability Unit abandons probability entirely.
Yeah.
He uses his final 3 seconds not to run, but to grab the 180-pound hiker by their heavy safety harness. He plants his boots deep into the sand, and he hurls the victim backward with absolutely every ounce of strength he possesses.
It's his final calculation. He acknowledges his own mathematical failure. He knows his life is forfeit, but he calculates the hiker can be thrown just far enough to clear the radius.
And the visual described in the file is pure cinematic horror. You have this heavy, unconscious hiker tumbling backward across the red dirt. The hiker slides past the invisible boundary line right to Hatch's feet. And at that exact millisecond, the air shimmers.
The 34 seconds are up.
Yeah. The low, violent humming of the massive centrifuges suddenly returns. The air pressure spikes, and the invisible, impenetrable wall of the temporal field snaps violently back into place.
And Elias Vance is trapped on the inside.
It is a devastating trap, because he isn't just locked in a cage with a bomb. He is locked inside a severe distortion of time. Hatch's final log describes the grim reality of looking through that shimmering barrier.
Yeah, that visual is haunting.
He says Elias was frozen, caught mid-breath, his arms still extended from throwing the hiker, just looking right back at them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how gravitational time dilation works, the dilemma Elias faces inside that field is beyond human comprehension. The relativity is agonizing.
How so?
Well, if he simply stands there and does nothing, the time dilation works against him in an unfathomable way. Relative to the timeline of Hatch standing on the outside, Elias will starve to death in a fraction of a second.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Hatch would just see him instantly wither.
But to Elias, subjectively inside the field.
Subjectively, Elias will live out his entire natural lifespan, like decades of his life, completely alone, standing in the space of a single desert afternoon.
It's a psychological torture chamber. You either starve instantly to the world, or you age into dust entirely alone in your own mind, staring out at your friends who appear completely frozen to you.
It's horrific. But Elias doesn't allow either of those outcomes to happen.
No. He still holds the detonator for the shaped explosive charge in his hand, and in a final act of agency, to prevent the machine from existing, he squeezes the trigger.
He chooses to fulfill the mission parameters. He destroys the machine, knowing he is trapped at ground zero of its blast radius.
But because he detonates this bomb inside a field of extreme gravitational time dilation, it doesn't look or sound like a normal explosion to the people standing just outside the boundary.
Right, because of the time warp.
Hatch and the rest of the BPU team, they don't hear a massive bang. They don't see a sudden, violent flash of destruction. The source material describes it exactly like this. It looked like a silent, blinding orange flower blooming in ultra-slow motion.
The time inside the field is moving so incredibly slowly relative to the outside world that the physical expansion of the explosion itself is subjected to that drag.
It's barely moving.
Right. The rapid chemical reaction of the bomb is happening at a normal lethal speed to Elias, but to Hatch and the team on the outside, the explosion is just crawling.
And this is the part of the file that I find most difficult to process. The sheer torment of the observers. Hatch and the surviving team are forced to stand there in the scorching 105-degree desert heat for 3 agonizing hours.
3 hours.
Because that is how long it takes for the slow-motion explosion to fully expand inside the temporal field and reach the edge of the machine.
The profound psychological weight of that experience is staggering. Witnessing a colleague, your leader, become a martyr in slow motion. It is a tragedy stretched across 3 entire hours where you are forced to be a completely passive observer.
It leaves me completely speechless. Just the cruelty of the physics involved. How does a team ever recover from that? You are standing there, sweating in the very heat that ruined the equation in the first place, watching a real-time 3-hour monument to a single dropped decimal point.
Yeah.
Every millimeter that blast wave moves, you know your friend is being torn apart. And you can't look away, you can't intervene, you can't even hear it. It's unbearable trauma.
Hatch's tactical log describes it as the most beautiful, horrific thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
And that duality perfectly captures the profound dissonance of the moment. The visual majesty of a contained slow-motion star being born right in front of you, juxtaposed with the absolute horror of knowing your mentor is trapped inside it, paying the price for his own hubris.
For 3 hours, they just stand in the dirt, waiting for a bomb to finish exploding. And eventually it ends. After 3 hours of creeping outward, the slow-moving blast wave finally reaches the massive centrifuges of the machine. It breaks them apart.
And the moment the centrifuges lose their structural integrity, they stop spinning, the machine dies,
And the temporal field finally collapses.
real-time rushes violently back into that space.
But there is nothing left. The silence of the desert returns. There is just scorched sand, destroyed metal, and among the ashes they recover a single, slightly melted item. Elias Vance's FBI badge.
Yeah.
The behavioral probability unit lost its brilliant founder, not to an enemy combatant, but to an ambient temperature reading.
The aftermath fundamentally shatters the core philosophy of the BPU. They truly believed that if your models were sophisticated enough, you could predict and control reality. They believed human error could be mathematically erased. But this tragedy proved that the universe is infinitely complex. There is always one more variable hiding in plain sight.
So what does this all mean? For you listening right now, you are probably not calculating thermal venting windows for weaponized time fields in the desert.
Probably not.
But in our modern lives, we are doing something remarkably similar every day. We increasingly rely on algorithms, predictive models, and perfect math to keep us safe, to guide our decisions, and to tell us what is going to happen next. We trust the GPS without looking at the road. We trust the financial projections. We trust the data to make sense of a chaotic world.
We build our own sterile models for how our lives are supposed to go, based on heavily curated variables.
Exactly. But we must ask ourselves, what is the 105-degree desert sun in our own lives? What invisible, completely mundane variable are we ignoring because it doesn't fit neatly into our carefully calculated plans? Because the map is never the territory, and the model is never the reality. Eventually, the real world pushes back.
That is the tragic paradox of Elias Vance. He calculated the exact mathematical probability of success, but he forgot to calculate the physical environment he was standing in. He relied on the theory of the machine and ignored the reality of the heat.
And as Agent Hatch noted in his final somber log entry, Elias himself used to teach his new recruits a phrase he ultimately forgot. Probability isn't certainty. Rest in peace, Elias Vance. The behavioral probability unit is going dark. We'll see you in Season 3.